Whitney Houston spent years selling control. Perfect vocals, perfect hair, perfect smiles, perfectly timed gratitude. But in the Beverly Hilton Hotel, Suite 434, the details didn't match the image. Investigators later documented a bathroom scene that looked less like a superstar's comeback week and more like a room being managed minute to minute. Prescription bottles, everyday items, and signs of recent drug use in the same space where she was found unresponsive. The contradiction wasn't just tragic, it was operational. The most famous voice of her era died in a hotel built for industry parties. On the weekend the music business gathers to celebrate itself. Whitney Elizabeth Houston was born September 8, 1963 in Newark, New Jersey. The public later learned her as The Voice, but the private foundation was practical. Music was work, not fantasy. Her mother Cissy Houston was already a professional singer. Church was both training ground and pipeline. Whitney sang in church as a child, in a city where ambition and discipline were inseparable from survival. The public saw a natural vocal miracle. Privately, she was being built inside a family system that understood gigs, contracts, and reputation long before pop stardom arrived. As a teenager, Houston's voice traveled through New Jersey's music ecosystem. Church, local performances, and industry-adjacent opportunities. The public story later emphasized discovery, like lightning striking once. Privately, she was already being evaluated for market fit, image, sound, discipline, and who could be trusted around her. Years later, one of the most consequential private relationships of her early life became public. Robin Crawford, a close friend and later employee, wrote that their bond turned romantic in their teens and ended before Houston's recording deal as fame pressures intensified. The public saw a clean, wholesome rising star. Privately, she was already learning which parts of herself would be edited out to keep the machine stable. Houston signed with Arista Records in 1983, with Clive Davis as the executive force behind the launch. The public saw the debut as destiny. Privately, it was strategy. The label positioned her for maximum crossover, pop reach, radio dominance, and a controlled public identity. That crossover would become both her weapon and her vulnerability. It made her enormous, and it created a permanent argument about who she was for. Her self-titled debut album arrived in 1985 and turned into a sustained commercial takeover. The public saw a new standard of vocal excellence. Privately, success meant a schedule that rewarded endurance and punished hesitation. Constant promotion, expectations of perfection, and little tolerance for messy humanity. The persona had to be consistent because the brand had to be consistent. Houston's crossover success drew backlash in parts of the black music ecosystem. Criticism that she was too pop, too polished, not black enough. The public saw a superstar caught in a culture war about authenticity. Privately, this was the cost of the strategy that made her massive. The more universally sellable she became, the more she was accused of belonging nowhere. The tension wasn't abstract. It shaped who she could collaborate with, how she presented herself, and how much she had to defend her own identity while still delivering flawless performances. In 1992, Houston's acting debut The Bodyguard and its soundtrack turned her into a once-in-a-generation commercial force. The public saw romance and glamour. Privately, this was a high-risk expansion. Film contracts, soundtrack control, and larger financial structures riding on her reliability. Her recording of I Will Always Love You became a defining cultural event, and the success amplified the pressure to repeat the impossible. Houston married Bobby Brown on July 18, 1992. The public saw a shocking union, America's polished pop queen with a bad boy R&B star. Privately, it fused two volatile celebrity ecosystems, two entourages, two brands, two sets of legal and financial obligations, and a relationship that would be scrutinized like a public trial. The marriage didn't just change her personal life, it changed her risk profile as a product. Houston and Brown's daughter, Bobby Christina Brown, was born in 1993. The public saw a new chapter, the superstar as mother. Privately, motherhood added stakes to everything: security, privacy, cash flow, and family dynamics. In later years, Houston's estate planning would explicitly center her daughter, creating a structure that would matter intensely after 2012. By the late 1990s, Houston's catalog was already historic, but the business around her was becoming more complicated. Evolving media, relentless coverage, and mounting scrutiny of her personal life. The public saw a star still famous but increasingly unstable in headlines. Privately, this is where the maintenance costs rise. Security, private travel, staff, legal exposure, and the quiet reality that a superstar's life is expensive even when she isn't releasing new work at peak frequency. Financial specifics vary by source. What's consistent across reporting is that major money did not guarantee long-term stability. In August 2001, Houston re-signed with Arista in a reported $100 million multi-album agreement, widely covered as one of the biggest deals in music. Publicly, it looked like a triumphant vote of confidence. Privately, large deals are also debt-like obligations, advances, delivery requirements, and the need to keep producing commercially viable work under intense scrutiny. If the artist struggles, the contract doesn't pause. Pressure shifts onto managers, lawyers, insurers, and the label's internal risk calculations. In 2002, a company tied to her father, John Houston, sued her for $100 million for alleged breach of contract, reported as a dispute over representation and money. Publicly, it played as another celebrity scandal. Privately, it signaled something worse for stability, a family structure that could no longer contain the financial and power conflicts around her. The case was widely reported at the time, and coverage emphasized the public plea by her ailing father for settlement. On April 12, 2002, Houston sat with Diane Sawyer on ABC's Primetime and addressed drug use and tabloid narratives directly. The public saw a star fighting for her image. Privately, it was an emergency maneuver, a controlled environment built to stop uncontrolled stories. But the interview also revealed the core problem. Her life had become a public management issue, and the facts were no longer safely kept behind gates. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you like this story. The reality series Being Bobby Brown, mid-2000s, exposed volatile domestic dynamics to mass audiences. Publicly, it was spectacle. Privately, it lowered the wall between brand and dysfunction, turning instability into a product and making it harder for any future comeback to feel clean. The machine could sell drama, but it couldn't easily rebuild trust afterward. Houston filed for divorce from Brown in 2006, and it was finalized in 2007. Publicly, it was a conclusion to a chaotic narrative. Privately, divorce is paperwork, custody, assets, and exposure. In August 2007, Reuters reported she auctioned items to address a debt tied to storage, small compared to her peak earning power, but revealing in what it implied about disorganization, cash flow stress, or both. In 2009, Houston launched a major comeback period with new music and major media attention. Publicly, the story was redemption. Privately, the industry had evolved. Harsher touring economics, less patience for inconsistency, and an internet-era audience that could replay every imperfect performance forever. The comeback required stability, but stability was exactly what she struggled to sustain. In this period, Houston's public appearances drew scrutiny about her vocal condition and reliability. Publicly, fans argued, illness, nerves, sabotage, aging, exhaustion. Privately, it's simpler and colder. Touring is a physical grind, and any instability, health, substances, sleep, mental focus, shows up as performance risk that affects insurers, promoters, and future bookings. The machine responds by tightening control, which can increase pressure, which can worsen instability. In late 2011, Houston worked on the film Sparkle, her first movie role in years. Publicly, it was a comeback narrative being rebuilt through a family story on screen. Privately, it was also a business reset. Film schedules are structured, supervised, and often safer than the chaos of touring. Sony dated the film for an August 2012 release, placing her return inside a calendar designed for marketing momentum. Whitney Houston's career was never just Whitney. It was labels, managers, lawyers, publicists, producers, and gatekeepers, people whose livelihoods depended on her being functional, promotable, and insurable. Arista's long partnership with Houston shows how power concentrates. The label finances recordings and marketing, the artist delivers product, the executive layer decides what the public sees. Her 2001 megadeal wasn't just praise, it was a structure that increased obligations and increased consequences if she couldn't deliver. Control also came through narrative management. When her private life became tabloid infrastructure, major interviews functioned like crisis containment. The 2002 Diane Sawyer sit-down wasn't casual honesty, it was a televised attempt to stabilize reputation and keep the business moving. Money pressure became explicit in the 2002 lawsuit linked to her father's company. That's not just family drama, it's a sign that financial and managerial relationships around her were breaking into open conflict, with litigation as leverage. Security was another layer of the machine. The FBI's public files show that threats and extortion-related concerns around Houston existed for years, proof that fame brought not only revenue but persistent risk that had to be managed, documented, and paid for. There wasn't one scandal. There was a sequence of career-shifting breaches. Moments where the public image could no longer contain the private reality. One breaking point was the public debate about identity and crossover. The not black enough criticism wasn't a tabloid footnote. It was a reputational wound that followed her for years and shaped how people interpreted her choices. Publicly, she kept winning. Privately, she was being told, repeatedly, that winning had made her suspect. Another breaking point was the visibility of addiction and instability. By the early 2000s, the story had moved from rumor to direct confrontation, including on-camera discussion in major network interviews. Publicly, audiences consumed a redemption arc. Privately, the pattern reported across years. Rehab attempts, canceled plans, strained relationships, suggested a system that could not consistently protect her from herself or protect her from those benefiting from access to her. A third breaking point was commercial dependence. The larger the contracts and obligations, the harder it becomes to stop. Deals lock in timelines, touring contracts lock in appearances, brand management locks in silence. The business benefits from the illusion of control. The cost is that when control finally fails, it fails in public. What follows is the tightest documented window before her death, grounded in publicly reported movements, scheduled industry events, and official statements. December 2011, Los Angeles/industry calendars. Sony set Sparkle for an August 2012 release, a concrete signal that her return was being packaged for the next year's market. Publicly, that looked like momentum. Privately, it raised stakes. Press cycles, soundtrack planning, and appearances would likely follow. Late January 2012, Grammys week approaching, Houston was expected at Clive Davis's annual pre-Grammy event at the Beverly Hilton, a high-density room of executives, press, and industry politics. Publicly, that's where legacies are celebrated. Privately, it's where artists are evaluated in real time, how they look, how they sound, how stable they appear. September 2, 2012, Hollywood, California. Houston made what is widely cited as her last public stage appearance when she joined Kelly Price and sang Jesus Loves Me. Publicly, it offered reassurance. She was present, performing, still Whitney. Privately, it also showed she was moving through nights and venues during a week that already carried heavy pressure and scrutiny. October 2, 2012, Beverly Hills, California. Reports placed her in and around the Beverly Hilton as pre-Grammy activity intensified. Publicly, it was normal, a superstar in town for the biggest weekend. Privately, normal meant being in the same building where the industry party would happen, where security, staff, and schedules would be working around her. November 2, 2012, Beverly Hills, California. The timeline becomes sharply documented. Houston was found unresponsive in a bathtub in her fourth-floor room at the Beverly Hilton Hotel. A member of her entourage called for help. Paramedics attempted resuscitation. She was pronounced dead at 3:55 p.m. local time. Police stated early that there were no obvious signs of foul play. In the following weeks, officials confirmed the medical conclusion. Houston's death was ruled an accidental drowning, with heart disease and cocaine use listed as contributing factors in coroner reporting covered by Reuters and other outlets. When the detailed report became public, it described evidence of recent drug use paraphernalia and multiple medications in the room. Publicly, the story hardened into a final narrative: fame, addiction, tragedy. Privately, those details were the last footprint of a life being managed by minutes. Who was with her, who left, what was bought, what was found, and how quickly the emergency response unfolded. The immediate aftermath split into two tracks: mourning and administration. Law enforcement concluded its investigation and stated there was no sign that a crime occurred, after reviewing the autopsy and related findings. That closed one set of questions while intensifying another. If no one did this to her in a criminal sense, how did the system around her still fail so completely? Her estate planning quickly mattered. Reporting on the will indicated Houston had made arrangements that centered her daughter, Bobby Christina Brown, with Patricia Houston, Pat Houston, her sister-in-law and manager, named in key administrative roles. Publicly, it looked orderly. Privately, estates of global stars are never just paperwork. They are control of brand, recordings, licensing, and long-term revenue streams. In the years after her death, the business value of her catalog only increased, through reissues, documentaries, and licensed projects. That created a permanent tension: art versus asset, legacy versus monetization. Even recent legal reporting around licensing disputes for the 2022 biopic era shows how aggressively rights holders protect the catalog. The public sees tributes, the private reality is contract enforcement. And then there were the rumors, some amplified by documentaries and memoirs, others recycled by tabloids. The clean boundary is this. What is proven is what officials documented about her death and what credible reporting documented about her career contracts and public crises. What remains disputed, such as certain childhood abuse allegations raised in later documentaries, exists as reported claims, not established fact, and is still contested in the public record. The story ends without a neat conclusion because the facts leave a trail of unanswered, grounded questions. Who exactly had the authority to stop her schedule when warning signs were visible? Label, management, family, or Whitney herself? How much did financial obligation and brand pressure shape the decisions made around her in the final year? And why did the industry's most public weekend, designed to celebrate music, become the setting where its biggest voice disappeared? Don't forget to subscribe and like if you like this story.